There's a place where the earth breathes. Maybe it's just a well. That's what the locals claim when outsiders come asking questions about a ritual so old it predates recorded history. They speak of an earth embrace, a pact between mortals and the land itself, but no one really knows because the caves are lost to the earth. They say the earth remembers those who surrender themselves to it, not in the way history remembers kings or poets, but in a slower, more secretive manner, as if the soil itself keeps a ledger of human bargains. The caves are up there somewhere in the mountains, hidden amongst peaks that touch the clouds and valleys that hold the secrets of forgotten languages. And if you go looking, you might find them, carved into the soft stone, almost invisible except to those who know where to look. These are places where men and women walked into the earth willingly. They were not prisoners, they were not forced. The choice was theirs, or so the legend insists, and they did it for one reason: to shed the weight of being human and ascend into something the living could not comprehend. Old scrolls speak of the earth embraces, a rite so rare that even in the kingdoms that practiced it, only a handful were deemed worthy. Those selected would walk alone into a pit carved deep into the hillside, their steps echoing against the damp walls as if each sound marked a farewell. Once inside, they would sit robed in layers of woven hemp, their faces calm as though watching a horizon only they could see. The entrance would be sealed, and then silence. Some say the chosen ones became protectors of the land, their essence seeping into roots and rivers. Others whisper that their spirits roamed the village for years, neither blessing nor cursing, merely watching. And in the oldest tale, the one rarely told aloud, they simply remained, weighted under the earth, untouched by time. Centuries later, a brittle journal was found in a mountain shrine, its pages warped by humidity, its ink faded into a rust-like brown. Inside was a single account, written by someone who claimed to have witnessed the last of these earth embrace ceremonies. It was not a priest or a villager who wrote it, but a traveler, a man who swore he did not believe in spirits until he stood at the mouth of that pit, watching the ritual's final moments and felt the ground beneath him breathe. If his words are true, then the legend is more than a story. It is a doorway, and once we open it, we may not like what waits on the other side. This is the last mountain pass. No outsider has ever returned from this place, not one. Some say the mountains do not let them pass. Others whisper that the mountain people do not let them pass. And in the oldest tales, the one rarely told aloud, the mountains and the people are one and the same. Even the wind seems to huddle for warmth, seeking shelter in the deep valleys where the sun never reaches. Yet life clings on. Hardy trees claw at the thin air, their branches gnawed fingers against the sky. And down in the shadowed glades, villagers cling to existence as tenaciously as ivy to a cliff face. Here, the people live close to the rhythms of nature, their lives dictated by the seasons, their fates intertwined with the land. When outsiders come this far, seeking knowledge or treasure, they are often warned away, not with weapons or anger, but with a quiet insistence that some things are best left undisturbed. Many heed the warning and turn back. Some do not. For those who stay, the mountain people offer hospitality, food and shelter, a brief respite from the journey. But questions are met with cryptic answers and wary smiles, and any who press too hard soon find themselves unwelcome. As the sun dips below the horizon, long shadows stretch across the valley, twisting familiar shapes into menacing silhouettes. The cold deepens, seeping into bones as surely as if one were standing at the mouth of an uncharted cave. Then, as the stars begin their slow ascent, for those who stay too late, the darkness offers no comfort, no solace. Out here, even the moon is a stranger. In the end, it is the mountains themselves that prove most inhospitable. Travelers who push on through the night often find themselves lost in labyrinthine paths, stumbling through thick mists that seem to have a will of their own. Some say the mountains do not let them pass, that ancient spirits guard the hidden ways, ensuring that outsiders never truly reach the heart of the kingdom of the clouds. If you came this far, you might think you're safe. You might think you understand. But sometimes it is in the quietest places that the most ancient magic sleeps, waiting for those with the courage and the foolishness to wake it. This is a story from a traveler's journal, a first-hand account written by an unknown author whose name has been lost to time. All we know of him is what he chose to share with us, his readers, which is why he refers to himself simply as the observer. He could have been anyone. That's part of what makes this story so compelling. It's a story that could have been mine or yours, which is why it's important to listen closely to the words of those who came before us, even if their faces are forgotten. The observer tells us he was passing through a mountain pass when a sudden landslide blocked the road. He had no choice but to turn back and seek shelter in a nearby hamlet, a cluster of wooden homes lashed together by wind and centuries. Here, the air was heavy with the scent of rain-soaked soil, and the people spoke in a dialect that sounded older than the stones underfoot. For 2 nights he stayed there, listening to the rhythm of dripping water and the murmur of an ancient tongue. It was on his second night that a woman approached him. Her eyes were steady, her hands folded in the way one does when delivering a message not their own. She told him the village would be performing the earth embrace for the last time. The mountains had been restless, she said, and the elders believed a final offering was needed to calm their unseen guardian before he could ask what the earth embrace was. She smiled mysteriously and disappeared into the gathering dusk. At dawn, the entire village gathered at the edge of a slope where the earth dipped like a shallow bowl. At its center lay a deep pit, framed by pillars of cedar wrapped in cloth strips that fluttered in the wind. Around it, villagers moved in slow, deliberate patterns, their voices humming a tune without melody, more vibration than song. From the far end of the clearing, the observer saw someone approaching. He couldn't make out any details, only that it was an elderly man. By the time he got closer, the villagers had formed a circle, and the newcomer stood in the center, skin creased like parchment. Wearing a robe dyed the deep green of moss, he walked with neither hesitation nor pride, his gaze fixed on the pit ahead. The observer noted how the crowd parted for him without a word, as though the path had been waiting all along. When the man stopped at the pit's edge and looked up, the villagers fell silent. He wasn't looking at the sky, but at the mountains that rose in silent tiers beyond the clouds. The humming began again, this time coming from the elderly man. A pair of attendants approached, each carrying a bowl filled with something dark and granular. They poured the contents over his shoulders, letting it cascade down his back, the earth touching him before he touched the earth. Then, without ceremony, he stepped forward and began his descent. What happens next, dear listener, is both strange and powerful. The observer leans in, his fingers gripping the damp cedar post beside him. Each step the man took seemed to dull the sound of the humming, until by the time he reached the bottom it was almost inaudible. What did the man say? The journal does not say. All we know is that the earth embraced him and the mountain sighed. 3 days later, when the pit was uncovered again, the chamber was empty. The robe remained. The man did not. Some may hear this story and think only of the physical journey, the traveler's literal descent into the earth. But what troubles me is the idea of a man willingly leaving the world, forsaking his former self, forsaking the life that was his. Because while the mountains rise and the earth embraces, there are other forces at play, other journeys that cannot be seen but can still break your heart. Sometimes the greatest adventure is staying exactly where you are. And yet here is the observer, forever changed by what he saw, forever haunted by the absence of the man who stepped into the earth and did not come back. And with that, I leave you to ponder the questions raised by this tale. Who was the man and why did he choose to vanish? What did he seek in the earth's embrace, and what did he find? And what does it mean for us when the ground beneath our feet trembles with secrets too big for us to see? These are questions I ask you to consider as we conclude our journey today. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to share it with others. Until next time, may your own paths be filled with wonder and your steps light upon the earth. The traveler disappeared 2 months ago while exploring a remote mountain village. No sign of a struggle, no indication of where he might have gone, as if he'd simply dissolved into thin air. When I heard about it, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. Unlike the locals, their faces serene as if repeating a truth older than language. They believed the earth had taken him. They spoke of it as though it were the most natural thing in the world. But when I pressed for details, the answers shifted like mist. Some said the man had dissolved into the stone walls, his spirit spreading through the mountain like rainwater through moss. Others whispered he had walked deeper into the unseen corridors below where no human voice could follow. One night I couldn't sleep, so I wandered to the edge of the pit. The full moon pooled at its bottom, revealing the robe still lying in its place, undisturbed, yet something was different. The folds seemed tighter as if the cloth had been wrapped around an invisible form. A faint scent rose from it, neither pleasant nor foul, but unmistakably alive. He reached for the cedar post again, and this time I swore it was warm. In the days that followed, the village revealed its other secrets. There were stones set deep into the hillsides, carved with spirals that seemed to draw the eye inward. The patterns were not ornamental. They matched faint scars in the land itself, places where the soil sank in strange, almost deliberate shapes. The elders claimed these were sleeping mouths, ancient chambers from an age when people spoke directly to the earth. Those who entered remained beyond the reach of the living. But in exchange, the land would remain fertile, the streams clear, and the storms gentle. I began to suspect the truth was more layered. Perhaps the ritual was not simply about transformation, but about forging a pact, a bond between the living and something beneath them. But one account the elders did not share willingly. It came from a mason who had once been tasked with repairing a collapsed section of hillside. He spoke of finding a narrow shaft behind the rubble, leading to a chamber where the walls were lined with smooth surfaces, neither stone nor wood, and in the center sat a figure, upright, eyes closed, wearing a robe that looked exactly like the one in the pit. When the mason returned the next day, the chamber had sealed itself as though the mountain had exhaled and shut its mouth. It's just a story, a local legend perhaps, or maybe the ramblings of a superstitious old man. But what if there's something more, something beneath the surface? What if the mountain remembers those it consumes? As the days passed, I found myself drawn back to the village. Not because I wanted to disappear, but because I didn't want to forget. I bought land near the mountain, far enough away that no one would think me foolish, but close enough to see the mists rise from its slopes. Sometimes at night, I still hear the whispers of the villagers, their words echoing the sentiment of an ancient prayer. Take me, earth, and let me become one with you. And when the moon is full, I go to the edge of the pit and touch the cold stone, willing it to remember the shape of my hand. I do not want to be taken, not yet. But I too would like to speak the language of the mountain. I would like to know what it remembers, and if it remembers me. Weeks passed, and the mountain mist grew heavier, clinging to the roofs like a living shroud. The observer had intended to leave. Each morning he walked to the lip of the valley, hoping the fog would have lifted, but the path out of the valley lay drowned in fog, as though the land itself would not let him go. Then one morning he awoke to find the ritual had begun again. This time the chosen one was a woman in her middle years. Her hair was bound with a strip of weathered cloth. Unlike the old man who had walked serenely to his fate, her eyes darted, not in fear, but in calculation, as though she knew the shape of what awaited and had accepted it long ago. The villagers gathered in the same clearing, but something in their manner had shifted. The humming was softer, the movements less measured, as if they were merely repeating an act they no longer fully believed in. The cedar pillars still stood, but their cloth wrappings were frayed, rain-darkened, and trembling in the mountain breeze. When the woman reached the pit, she did not look at the mountains, she looked at the observer. The glance was brief, but it was enough. Her gaze carried a message, sharp and silent. Watch closely. Then she began her descent. The air grew dense, the humming thinned into silence. From where he stood, the observer saw her robe ripple. Though there was no wind in the pit, she reached the bottom and stepped beyond the lip of shadow into the chamber below. For a moment, her figure was still visible, outlined in the dim light. Then she turned, and her face changed. It was not fear, nor peace. It was recognition, as if she had seen something waiting that she had always known would be there. Then she was gone. That night, before the ceiling clay had even dried, a sound rose from the pit, a low, resonant tone. Neither human nor entirely natural. It rolled across the clearing, touched the eaves of every house, and settled into the bones of those who heard it. The villagers did not stir, but the observer could not sleep. He knew the sound would not fade. It had entered him. In the morning, he went to the elder. The old woman regarded him with fathomless eyes. You heard it then, she said, her voice raspy with age. I did. Then you understand, she said, reaching for his hand, her grip surprisingly strong. There is no escape, not for any of us. He pulled away, shaken by the sudden contact. What does it mean? What is happening here? The old woman sighed, a sound like wind through dry leaves. These lands were shaped by powers older than the sky, and we are held to the earth by obligations older than our kind. You see, child, some things are meant to be forgotten. Sometimes the forgetting is a kindness, a mercy. Other times it is a just punishment. But why? Why are they doing this? To appease the earth, the elder said, her voice barely a whisper. To keep the balance. Before the first seed is cast, before the sun sets and rises, before the world begins to dream, the mountains rise and hunger. Only what is given can be taken, and only what is taken can be given. A life for a life, so we give them what is owed. He stared at the ground, understanding dawning slowly. They are sacrificing her. The elder nodded, and when the offering is complete, the earth will be appeased. Until the next time, when the balance tips again and the offering must be made anew. The observer recoiled, disgust and pity warring within him. How long has this been going on? How many? The elder's eyes glittered like chips of obsidian. Long enough, she said, that none can remember when it began. As for how many, count the pillars, child, and add your number to it, plus one more. That is how many have gone. He looked back at the pit, calculating. There were 14 pillars. 14, he whispered, horrified. The elder laid a gnarled hand on his arm. And soon there will be 15. He wanted to ask who would be next, but he knew the answer. They had watched him, he had seen the glances, heard the whispers, felt the subtle shift in the atmosphere whenever he entered the village. He had thought them wary, because of his strangeness, because of his questions, because of the tales he had brought from the outside world. Tales that spoke of progress and enlightenment, of science and reason, of a world that had moved on from such primitive customs. But they weren't wary because of that. He realized now they were wary because of him, because in the stories he told there was no place for this remote, mist-choked valley or its dark secret, and so they feared he would bring change, not knowing that change was precisely what they dreaded most. Because, as the days passed and the full moon drew near, he found himself drawn to the edge of the village, standing at the mouth of the valley, watching the mist writhe and twist in the hollows of the hills, knowing that soon he, too, would be taken, knowing that soon he, too, would be forced to choose between the world he knew and the abyss that beckoned. The mist-wreathed village was silent, its houses huddled together as if for warmth, their windows dark and unseeing. It was a place that seemed to exist outside the flow of time, untouched by the world. The road was closed, the cars long gone, and the observer found himself strangely reluctant to leave. It wasn't just the oppressive atmosphere or the unsettling quiet. It was as if the village itself had become heavier, more significant. Every path, every stone wall thrummed with a memory that was almost tangible. As he walked, he felt a profound disquiet, a sense of being observed, not in a frightening way, but as if the very essence of the place was pressing him to look deeper, to understand more. On his final morning, he returned to the clearing, the heart of this strange enigma. The pit was open, the robe lay at the bottom. The observer approached cautiously. He wasn't sure what he expected to find, but the reality was both unexpected and unsettling. There was no trace of clay sealing the opening. The cedar posts were bare, stripped of the cloth strips that had been tied around them. The air hung heavy, still vibrating with an energy that refused to be subdued. He descended into the pit, each step echoing in the confined space. The air grew colder, the light dimmer. When he reached the bottom, he found not a tomb, but a void. A vast emptiness that seemed to stretch into eternity. And then he heard it, a sound so faint it was almost imperceptible, yet so clear in its message. It was a whisper from the earth itself, welcoming him, beckoning him to surrender. The observer paused, torn between the primal call of the earth and the equally powerful pull of his life above. It was a moment of intense struggle, a battle between two irreconcilable worlds. The observer looked back at the opening, at the sliver of sky visible above the trees, and he thought of all he was leaving behind. His life, his loves, his dreams. Then he turned back to the enveloping darkness, the whispering earth, and he took another step. He descended further, enveloped by the earth's embrace. The temperature dropped, the air thickened. The sound of the earth grew louder, more insistent. It was a song, a lullaby that promised peace, that offered release. The observer closed his eyes, surrendering to the inevitable. And then he awoke. Blinking against the harsh glare of the sun, he realized he was lying on the forest floor, the rough bark of a tree digging into his shoulder. Disoriented, he sat up, his gaze falling on the familiar journal lying open at his side. Its pages, filled with cryptic symbols and indecipherable script, seemed to pulse with a faint inner light. As he stared at the journal, memories came flooding back. The eerie silence of the village, the unsettling emptiness of the pit, the beckoning darkness. But there was something new, something he hadn't experienced before, a sense of completion, a feeling of profound peace. The observer rose, brushing dirt from his clothes. He looked around, realizing he was no longer in the clearing. The trees were different, the sunlight filtering through the leaves in unfamiliar patterns. He was deep within the forest, far from the village, yet he felt an overwhelming sense of connection to it. As he walked, the forest seemed to guide him, leading him along a path he couldn't remember taking. After what felt like hours, he emerged from the trees, blinking against the bright sunlight. Before him lay the road, winding like a silver thread through the emerald green. And at the end of it, disappearing into the haze, was the village, silent, still, and waiting. The observer hesitated, torn between the life he once knew and the world he'd just left behind. But the pull of his old life was weaker now, dulled by the experiences of the past few days. With a final glance at the village, he stepped onto the road and started walking. He didn't carry any souvenirs, no physical reminders of his journey. But the experience had changed him, altered his perception of the world in ways he couldn't begin to understand. The journal, however, was different. Its pages, once filled with cryptic symbols, now bore faint lines, spirals that mirrored those carved into the stones, patterns that seemed to shift and change as he looked at them, binding him to the earth in ways he never imagined possible. In the years that followed, the observer told no one of his journey into the earth's embrace. Sometimes, though, in the liminal spaces between waking and sleep, he would feel the cedar post beneath his hand again, warm, steady, pulsing with that ancient, impossible rhythm. And in those moments he understood the truth. The earth does not forget those who surrender to it. It waits.